We kick off another week here with our second mock draft Monday of 2023. And on this edition, Lamar Jackson gets plenty of help, assuming he stays. We talk about that, Chuck Clark, analyze mock drafts, and so much more coming up next here on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I am your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for tuning in with us today, making us your first listen each and every day here on Locked On Ravens. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That also includes over in video form on YouTube, and we are back here today. It is another mock draft Monday. It's almost March. It's crazy. The draft is coming up. We have free agency in a couple of weeks, but every Monday now on Locked On Ravens up until the draft, we will focus on the draft a little bit and talk about a mock draft that I do every week. And we're going to get into that today here. And on this edition, I'm excited for this one. I give Lamar Jackson plenty of help. And again, how I work with these, how I go through these, is I'm working with the roster that the Ravens currently have right now. And right now I'm operating as if, Lamar Jackson has not been traded. Nothing's really happened, but since Lamar has not been traded, there's been nothing official. I'm just operating as if Lamar is on the team. So in this edition, we get Lamar plenty of help. We'll talk about that in the first segment of what I did for my mock draft that I put out yesterday. Then in the second segment, we'll flip away from the draft a little bit, talk a bit about Chuck Clark and the recent reports that have come out about what his status could potentially be moving forward with the Ravens, what that could mean for the team, what it could mean for the defense, and getting into that whole situation. Then in the final segment, we'll flip back to the draft and we'll analyze mock drafts that you submitted to the show here. I'll try to get to, again, as many as we can throughout the week here. Another really great engagement week on those mock drafts. I looked through every single one, so while I might not get to every single one this week, I promise I do go through them all. A lot of good ones. I'm excited to get through as many as I can here today in our final segment. But let's now dive into the content. First, though, if you are here with us on YouTube in video form, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel as well on YouTube. We are a 5-day-a-week daily Ravens podcast, Monday through Friday. So any Ravens news, analysis, updates, and more, we are here for you. Also in audio form, it's the same show, both audio and video form. If you are listening on your way to work or driving home from work or wherever, however you're listening and whatever you're doing, thank you for tuning in. If you're tuning in audio form today, be sure to follow along. And again, anywhere you get your favorite podcast, we're available anywhere you get your podcast. But let's now dive in to our first segment, talking about the mock draft I made. And we're going to first talk about, again, I kind of previewed it. We get a little crazy with these picks. I know some people might not agree with the process, but again, every week I'm trying to make it different. So I'm not just picking the same exact players each and every week. That would get pretty boring. So there are some circumstances, especially later on, where I'm probably going to pick guys I just haven't talked about on the show, even though maybe a fit is better. There are going to be some guys I repeat. That's inevitably going to happen. But this time around, I took Jackson Smith-Njigba last week. So if you want to check out that episode, highly recommend that. But this time around, it's another wide receiver, Jordan Addison, the USC wide receiver at pick number 22. Now, I liked this pick. Jordan Addison is one of my favorite prospects in this class, wide receiver-wise. I think he's going to be gone before the Ravens pick at 22 personally. But again, my saying is whatever the mock draft simulator gives you, you take it. And so I did take Jordan Addison at 22. Now, Addison stands at 6 feet. It's around 175 pounds. Transferred over from Pittsburgh to USC. I mean, he's somebody who has been dominating college for these last couple of years here. In 2022, he had 59 catches, 875 yards, 8 touchdowns, coming out to 14.8 yards per catch. And he's somebody he's become a star. He became a college star, and he's done it across multiple systems, which I think is really impressive. Now, the thing that people like a lot about Jordan Addison, myself included, his route running is really refined, really crisp. He has great ball skills and the balls in the air, tracking ability, and the big playability is something that I really like about Jordan Addison, where, again, we're operating as if Lamar's on the team this time around. You have another guy like a Rashad Bateman, like a Devin Duvernay, who can give you big plays on the field. And he ended up putting up, credited with a 4.51 40-yard dash, leaving high school, and ended up being someone who clicked with Kenny Pickett, obviously Steelers quarterback Kenny Pickett, early on. And I think for what Addison brings to the table, he's just a dynamic player. I mean, he's someone who works in the open field very well and really exploded onto the scene in 2021. And that obviously carried over to his transfer year in 2022. He's able to create in the quick passing game, the screen game. That's something that I know Todd Monken, I think, is going to want to implement on this team. So in that area, I think he would be a really big get for the Ravens. And look, he's not the biggest body in the world, but his hands are really good. He's able to get the ball. He has a wide area. He has a big catch radius is what I'll say, where he's able to get the ball away from his body, then bring it in and tuck and run. And that's really important. The yards after catch is also very good here. And it's not a guy who's going to necessarily, you're not going to put him in every single role and he's going to play really, really well. I mean, some of the stuff that I talk about his explosiveness. He's not a burner guy. He's not an absolute speedster 4.3 guy. And physicality might be an issue for him at the next level. But I think for him, he has proven that he can be a high volume target. And that, to me, I think is very important. But next, let's move on to the third round here. Pick 86 in the third round because Baltimore doesn't have a second rounder. I continue the wide receiver trend. I take Nathaniel Tank Dell out of Houston, a wide receiver. Now, Tank Dell is probably going to be a first-round prospect, maybe an early second guy. There's no way Tank Dell is available for the Ravens at 86. There's just no way. But what is my saying? The mock draft simulator gives you take it. This is insane value. That's why I did it. And I think it lines up with kind of what I want to talk about with taking back-to-back wide receivers, where honestly, I probably prefer a corner at 86, but the talent here in Tank Dell was just, you can't pass that up. 2022 burst onto the scene, 109 catches, 1,398 yards, 17 touchdowns. This is a guy who's 5'10", 155, definitely on the smaller side. So you're getting two smaller wide receivers here. I think if you're the Ravens and this is the route you go, you need to get a big body in free agency. But Tank Dell, I mean, the talent is just, it's undeniable. He's somebody who is able to do, just a lot in terms of route running. He's a slot guy. He takes the majority of his snaps in the slot, but he can line up on the outside. You can even put him in the backfield a little bit. He's a Swiss Army knife in terms of what he can do. Now, he is a speed guy. He has really good foot speed. He wins against press situations with his feet, his quickness, and that's really, really good. But the concerns are with the size. Can that size translate to the next level? It's a risk a team will have to take, but in the third round, I'd 100% take that. I like him right now, probably as a very early, like T. Higgins, early second round prospect, late first round guy, maybe. But I think having an Addison, Tank Dell wide receiver room, plus Bateman, plus Duvernay, it's a very young room. I definitely think bringing a big bodied veteran outside of on top of those guys, but I don't know. I think for what the Ravens have, it would definitely be reinvesting in the wide receiver room and getting two very talented guys on the board. Then we move on to the fourth round. Corner is the pick here. I had to take a corner. Jacorian Bennett, the Maryland corner, was the pick here in the fourth round at number 125. And I thought for Jacorian Bennett, this is a guy, stats in 2022 aren't going to pop off the screen. 28 tackles, 2 interceptions, 2 pass defense. But he's someone who can play both on the inside and on the outside. You can put him at safety. But he's someone who, again, is like a defensive back prospect. And he's not necessarily just a pure outside corner, and that's it. He ends up standing at 5'11", 200 pounds. But again, just because he's not just 6 feet or over doesn't mean he's just a slot guy. And for him, he's a tackler. He's a very good tackler. Not necessarily a speed guy. Also can be a bit grabby as well. But as a fourth-round corner prospect, I think this would be a very solid pick for the Ravens. And he also is someone who is good in the run game, someone who imposes will physically there, but he also, his lower body's a little stiff when you watch film. I think that's something you can improve on, but it might take some work. So Jacorian Bennett was the pick there in the fourth round. Then we move to the fifth round. Colby Wooden, the edge/defensive lineman, depending on who you talk to. PFF has him as an edge, and I think the Draft Network has him as an interior defensive lineman. But he can move all over the field. Now, his profile here, he's 6'5", 284, so he'd be a big edge guy. Oh, the Draft Network actually has him as an edge. Never mind. But regardless, Colby Wooden is someone, 6 sacks in the 2022 season. He is an interior pass rusher. If you put him there, you can generate pressure on the quarterback. and also can play outside the tackle at the edge position, that positional versatility. We know the Ravens love that positional versatility. And for me, I'm looking at the defensive line room for the Ravens and seeing Calais Campbell, who's still there right now. That's probably one more year. What's the future of Justin Madubuike? What's the future of Roger Washington? 1 year deal for Brent Urban. Is Michael Pierce out after this year? So I think the Ravens will want to start stocking their interior defensive line cupboards again. And I think Colby Wooden, who can also play on the edge, would be a very good get for them. And then finally, we have a running back in round 6. Keaton Mitchell, the East Carolina running back, averaged 7.2 yards per carry in 2022. 1,452 yards, 14 touchdowns. He is a speed guy. He's a fast guy. He's not big. I know a lot of people are worried about the size. He's 5'9", 184. But you have Gus Edwards. You have J.K. Dobbins. I think if that speed back profile, I think, is very important for a team to have. I think Keaton Mitchell can fit that. So I know there are questions about, how badly do the Ravens need to take a running back. Well, J.K. Dobbins is in a contract year here. Gus Edwards might be a cap casualty. We don't know. So maybe the Ravens take a running back earlier. I'm not talking Bijan Robinson early, but maybe a running back's the pick there. I took a swing on, I think, a high upside guy. He, I think, needs to work on handling contacts a little better, but it just comes with the size. But when he's in the open field, he is somebody who is he flies. And you notice how fast he is on film. So I liked this one a lot. Again, getting Lamar Jackson, plenty of help with Jordan Addison and Tank Dell. You get the corner, you get the edge/defensive line guy, and then you get a running back to boot. So I liked it. We'll revisit the draft in the final segment, but coming up on our second segment, we'll be talking about Chuck Clark and what the whole situation is, the rumors surrounding his situation right now. So be sure to stay tuned. Still lots to dive into on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And the midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes drains. And I do have bad news for me personally, as in my season-long basketball league for fantasy, I had a 17-game win streak, and it was snapped. But it did come at the hands of the Serbian savior, Nikola Jokic, who, if you wanted to bet on his points or triple-double, which you got another one of last night. Nuggets won last night. You can check that out all over at FanDuel, and so many more exclusive bets like the 2x3, 2 3-pointers scored in the first 3 minutes, plus FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. We return here to our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here as we got into the mock draft I did for yesterday on Sunday. But now we're going to push the draft aside for a segment and talk a little bit about Chuck Clark. Now, there were reports that came out over the course of last week, and, there have been rumblings for a while now, even dating back to last year, about just what the situation is with Chuck Clark. Obviously, he revealed that he requested a trade last offseason. It didn't work. He played. Well, now we have reports coming out that Clark is likely going to be a cut or trade candidate this offseason. And I think that for the Ravens, I still in team keep Chuck Clark. I do understand the whole situation, though. If the Ravens were to cut Chuck Clark just outright, they would end up saving right around $3.5 million on their cap. But I think Chuck Clark is worth more than $3.5 million. He has about a $6 million cap hit, $7 million cap hit this year. But the situation just, I don't know the word. It almost feels awkward in a sense, just because people it feels like it's been known for so long that, yeah, Chuck Clark wasn't happy with the role he was in and requested the trade and obviously played last year. And not everything is known, not 100% of everything is out there. And I still think the Ravens would get value if they traded him, not like first or second round value, but I think they could get maybe a 4th, 5th, 6th rounder for him. So, if that's what the Ravens decide to do, if Chuck Clark feels like, yeah, look, I want a fresh start, this is not for me anymore. I get it. The Ravens, they signed Marcus Williams, they draft Kyle Hamilton. And now Hamilton was used in a lot of different roles last year. He was really good in the slot. They used him as a big nickel guy. So if the Ravens do move on from Chuck Clark, whether it is a trade or whether it is just a release, he gets waived or whatever, the Ravens will have to figure out what the back end for them looks like, because With Clark, he provides you a lot, but now the acquisition of Roquan Smith, I think you want to be able to get Patrick Queen and Roquan Smith on the field a lot. You might be saying playing 2 inside linebackers all the time, and the way the NFL has been, we've seen the Ravens use a ton of those 3 safety looks. And I've talked about it for a pretty long time before Roquan Smith came in about how the Ravens didn't need to play 2 inside linebackers on the field because you can put a guy like Chuck Clark or Kyle Hamilton in the box, and that guy can act as your, I guess if you want to call it, your second inside linebacker. So you can use 3 safety looks a lot and just have a dime backer right next to Patrick Queen, let's say, calling the shots and doing all that. And Chuck Clark's been a glue guy for them over the course of his entire career in Baltimore. I mean, he had 100 tackles last year. I think that goes unnoticed. Chuck Clark had 101 tackles for the Ravens last year combined. I mean, he's someone who's been a glue guy for them for many years now. Obviously, for as much as people want to talk about the green dot, some people really put stock into it. Some people say this is the most worthless thing ever. He has been a green dot wearer on this defense and very good at communicating to the guys where they need to be, where they need to line up. So I think that if they were to move on, it would obviously push Kyle Hamilton into a much greater role. And because of that, I think Baltimore, again, will have to look at their cornerback room and at least find some semblance of at least a part-time, trustworthy, reliable slot guy that they can put out there if they don't plan on using Kyle Hamilton as a big nickel for his entire career, which I don't think they will do that. I think they have pretty big plans for him for the course of his career and don't want to just use him in that role exclusively. So for the Ravens, moving on from Chuck Clark obviously means a big leap of faith in Kyle Hamilton. Obviously, I think it would mean some good things for Geno Stone too. That's a player I'd like to see in a bigger role in this defense. I think he's earned it. I think Geno Stone has definitely earned it. And the way he's played in pretty limited action has been really, really good. But then that next step comes of, can you find a slot guy? Can you find a couple of outside guys to help out guys like Marcus Williams and Marlon Humphrey and Kyle Hamilton and those guys in the back end? Because right now you're going to be relying on, if it's not Marlon Humphrey in that cornerback room, it is Brandon Stevens. It is Kyle Hamilton in a big nickel role. So the Clark situation, again, it just, I'm not saying it's like, oh, it's at the point of no return. There's no repairing it. This is it. Like, there's still a chance that Chuck Clark does stay a Raven, but it wouldn't shock me at all if he ends up leaving the team and finding an opportunity elsewhere with somebody else. And I still think, look, if the Ravens can find a way to keep Chuck Clark, if it's not going to impact their cap too much, I think that you keep him, at least in my opinion. But I do understand maybe Clark wants a bigger role somewhere else. I'm sure the pick of Hamilton and the signing of Williams wasn't necessarily jumping around for joy because he's like, oh yeah, two more guys in my room. I mean, I'm not saying he's a bad team player. I'm not trying to say that whatsoever. But again, it is just the nature of the business where for Williams, he's a 5-year, $70 million guy. For Kyle Hamilton, he's a very big blue chip guy, 1st round pick, very talented. With the Ravens getting Roquan Smith and with Patrick Queen on the team still right now, you want to use both those guys. You want to use Hamilton. You want to use Williams. I just think that if Clark really does want that starter-defined 90%, 85% snap role, it might be hard to find it in Baltimore moving forward from the next couple of seasons. And maybe that's where this happens. Or maybe the Ravens just view it as, look, we don't have a lot of great options to cut and save money from, as we talked about on an episode last week about potential cap casualties. Maybe that's just what this is. So for Chuck Clark, another situation to monitor throughout the offseason, but a guy who has definitely been very important to what the Ravens have done on defense. Is he the flashiest player? No. Is he the best safety in the league? No. But he's meant a lot to him. So we'll see how that situation unfolds throughout the rest of the offseason. But coming up, we're flipping the draft switch back on. We're diving into some mock drafts, analyzing mock drafts from our Mock Draft Sunday in the comment section. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Still lots to dive into on the show. We are back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still hanging with you here on this Monday to open up the week here on the show. Again, thank you so much for being here with us, tuning in, making us your first listen every day on Locked On Ravens. We are free and available, all podcasting platforms, including on YouTube. So if you are here with us in video form on YouTube, you see my face and my shirt and my background and everything. Be sure to follow along here, like and subscribe to the channel, and also in audio form wherever you're listening, however you're listening. Thank you so much for that. Be sure to follow along anywhere you get your podcast. But let's not dive into some mock drafts. We'll analyze some of these again for Mock Draft Sunday. I do retweet it on the Locked On Ravens account and say, if you have a mock draft, be sure to put it below. I'll try to get to it on the show throughout the course of the week here. And so we'll just, again, go through which ones I see first in the comment section. So we first have a mock draft from Al, who says, went BPA at 22. Murphy is too good to pass up, and edge could be a big need as well. Still managed to get a wide receiver and cornerback with the following picks, and then a Ben Powers replacement and Andrew Voorhees. So first we have Myles Murphy, the edge from Clemson at pick 22. Then Jalen Hyatt, the Tennessee wide receiver at 63. And you might be asking, how did Al get pick 63 here? Chuck Clark was traded. We just talked about Chuck Clark to the Kansas City Chiefs for the 63rd pick and the 123rd pick. That's a fourth rounder. So then we move on to pick number 86, Clark Phillips, third corner from Utah. Andrew Voorhees at 123, the guard from USC is the pick. Henry To'oTo'o, the Alabama linebacker, is the pick at 125. Kenny McIntosh, the Georgia running back, is at 159. And Cameron Young, Mississippi State defensive lineman, at pick 200. Yeah, if you're going best player, Myles Murphy is not a bad guy to get your hat hung up on here. This is a guy who I think is going to be a stud at the NFL level, but I know some people are thinking, well, Odafe Owe was a first rounder in 2021, edge guy. David Ajabo was a second rounder in 2022, edge guy. A first round pick on an edge in 2023 would be 3 years of investing either a first or a second in an edge guy. So I know some people might want to see the wide out or see a corner, but Myles Murphy is super, super talented. Jalen Hyatt is someone I think is going to probably go in the first. But again, you take what you give here in this mock draft. And then you have Clark Phillips, again, someone who I think is going to probably go in the second. So a lot of value here. I like the value overall, especially with those first four picks. And then you round it out here with a linebacker, running back, defensive lineman. I think Al here hits a lot. It's all the needs, I think, because again, my philosophy has been wide receiver and corner. Round 4 is my absolute last line. This is the round you need to have both those positions, at least one guy each. So second round wideout, third round corner meets my criteria. I like this one a lot from Al. Then we get into one from Jesse, who has the Ravens taking Deonte Banks, the corner from Maryland, at number 22. Then Tank Dell, the wide receiver from Houston, at 86. So I did a little of that in my mock draft. I like that pick. Kobe Turner, the Wake Forest defensive lineman, at 125. Michael Wilson, Stanford wide receiver, at 159. And Spencer Anderson, the Maryland guard, at 200. This one's solid. I think a lot of people like Deonte Banks, and this is a very deep corner class. I think from the middle of the first round to probably the end of day 2. Honestly, there are a lot of good prospects in the first 3 rounds. I think the Ravens can snag a very good corner here. Deonte Banks is definitely one of them. Tank Dell, we talked about. Then the last 3 picks, defensive line, another wide receiver, which again I'm okay with now, and then a guard here for I think Ben Powers potentially departing. I like it. A Maryland heavy draft too. 2 out of 5 guys coming from Maryland there from Jesse. And we couldn't do this without some Lamar trades, huh? Let's get into those. Robert Crabb here has the Ravens trading Lamar Jackson to the Carolina Panthers for the 9th overall pick, the 39th overall pick, the 61st overall pick, a round 1 in 2024, a round 2 in 2024, and a round 1 in 2025. With the 9th pick, Quentin Johnson, the TCU wideout, is the selection. Then at 22, Zay Flowers, the Boston College wideout, is the pick here. Deonte Banks then is the corner at 39 here that he takes out of Maryland. Andre Carter, the second Army edge, is at 61. Tank Dell, 60 at 86. Tank Dell's a pie for their 86 pick here. I like it. Carl Brooks, Bowling Green edge at 125. Jacorian Bennett, Maryland corner at 159. And Keaton Mitchell, East Carolina running back at 200. Look at that. We got 3 picks here that were the same as me in this one. And similar concept from Robert here, taking 2 wideouts with the first 2 picks. And then actually snags both Maryland corners with Deonte Banks and Jacorian Bennett. Now, the interesting part of Robert's mock draft is that there's no quarterback taken here, despite Lamar getting traded. So maybe this is the Ravens sign a mid-tier bridge quarterback. Maybe they roll with Tyler Huntley. I don't know. But maybe, 3 wideouts I think is probably a little too much. So maybe instead of Quentin Johnson, and I don't know who was on the board for Robert, but if Anthony Richardson is there, depending on how people feel about him, Will Levis, maybe CJ Stroud gets there. I like Bryce Young a lot. I don't think he's going to be there at 9. I think that maybe you take a quarterback there, then you go out with Zay Flowers, Tank Dell, you got Deontay. I like this draft a lot, and I like all three wideouts that Robert takes here, but I just think 3 is probably too many for rookie wideouts to go along with Bateman and Duvernay. I'd probably take 2 and then move to the veteran market free agency wise if we're going to do that. So interesting Lamar trade where I think this is the first one where there actually wasn't a quarterback taken after Lamar gets traded. But let's do one where there is a quarterback taken where Lamar's traded. We'll do who is Simeon Rapid. And we first here have a Lamar. We'll do the trade first. He gets traded to the Falcons, Lamar does, for the 8th overall pick, the 44th overall pick, the 75th overall pick, a round 1 in 2024, and a round 2 in 2024. Now, with the 8th pick, C.J. Stroud is the pick, the quarterback from Ohio State. Then Jackson Smith and Jigba, the Ohio State wide receiver, is the pick of 22. Cam Smith, the South Carolina corner, is at pick 44. Felix Anudike-Uzomah, the Kansas State edge, is at 75. Blake Freeland, the tackle from BYU, is at 86. Isaiah Foskey, the Notre Dame edge, is at number 125. Byron Young, Alabama defensive lineman, 159. Deuce Vaughn, Kansas State running back at 200. Elijah Higgins, Stanford wide receiver, is the 7th rounder at 223. And how we got this 7th round pick is the Ravens traded a 5th rounder in 2024 for the round 7 2023 pick. Now, I like the Stroud, Smith, and Jigba connection. I think Cam Smith is one of those, again, like late first, early second corners that's going to be really, really good in this league. And so all 3 of those, I mean, if Lamar gets traded, quarterback catapults to the top of the list, quarterback, wide receiver, corner, all in the first 3 picks, and you can round out the depth. Be Young here, not Bryce Young from Alabama, but Byron Young from Alabama. You got defensive line, a second wide receiver, running back, tackle, 2 edge guys. I like it. I think it's solid overall. I like Stroud as a prospect. I think him and Smith and Jigba will come in and provide young life to the offense. So I think this one's a pretty interesting one overall. Then we'll do a trade back one. Snow Moose has a trade back scenario. Doesn't involve Lamar Jackson, just a good old trade back. It was the 22nd overall pick going to the Buffalo Bills for 27, 91, and 139. I think if the Ravens were to trade back, I would want them to get a 2nd rounder in the process. So if we're talking Bills here, I'm probably asking for their 1st rounder and their 2nd rounder. Now, again, I don't know how the trade worked out. I don't know if they would do this on the simulator or not, but that's just me personally. I think if Baltimore trades back, they want to get back in the 2nd round. So getting a later 1st round pick plus a 2nd round pick, that's my route if they were to trade back for the Ravens. But Deontay Banks, the Maryland corner, is at pick 27 here. Carl Brooks, the Bowling Green, edge is at 86. Travius Hodges-Tomlinson, the TCU corner, is at 91. Parker Washington, Penn State wide receiver, at 125. Michael Wilson, Stanford wide receiver, at 139. Moro Ojomo, the Texas defensive lineman, at 159. And Eric Ray, the Oklahoma running back, at 200. Yeah, I mean, this is solid overall. The wide receiver pick, 2 corners before 1 wide receiver, I know is probably a little controversial. I mean, the 2 wide receivers Snow Moose does get, and Parker Washington and Michael Wilson, I think, good value. But, maybe instead of Carl Brooks, depending on who's on the board, I would maybe take another wide receiver, or I'd take a wide receiver. Then you go corner, wide receiver, corner, and then an edge in the 4th or the 5th round. But I think Carl Brooks is a fine prospect. I like Parker Washington a lot as a prospect. But for me, again, I'll just say that the trade down scenario is, I think, ideal for Baltimore is getting a late 1st and some form of a 2nd round pick within that. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in with us today. When we get back here tomorrow, it is more Ravens content from us. So be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube, follow along in audio form, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow.